Are there times in the table read when I would imagine you guys sometimes know that there's a joke, but you haven't found it, and you get to the table read, and then when you finally hear it, you kind of find it? Does that happen?
There are spots in every script where you know a joke needs to be there, and it just dies at the table read, and then at the next day's run through, we put in a different joke, and it dies again, and it's like this little black hole of non-comedy in a script, and we'll work all week chipping away. Why can't we find a joke that's going to fit this spot, and hopefully we get lucky by the end. I remember one hole was that when Sheldon was drinking the Long Island iced teas, when Penny was giving Sheldon the Long Island iced teas, and he said, it was something about, is it relaxing? It was something about...
Right, I think the joke ended up being, it's relaxed me out of my pants a few times, right, from Penny.
and that was like the 7th joke we tried to put in that spot. So, but we got there.
But even in front of an audience, when the audience is in and we're in the middle of taping, jokes will die sometimes then too, even though we've had all week. You know, when an audience doesn't laugh, we'll gather together as a group in a little panic on the side and pitch a new joke and run those lines out to the actors. And
it's the closest to like a sport in our lives. Is when we huddle up and try to think of something.
Do you get sweaty? I mean, I would imagine that the pressure is large at that point.
It takes a little while, but when you're on the 5th or 6th minute and you know the audience is waiting, you can start to feel that pressure mounting for sure.
Yeah, that's when you're Rudy. That's when you get a joke in, and they're just I'm going in, coach, so putting in my joke, and Steve walks over to the actors and says it to them, and if you're lucky, the actors laugh because they're hearing it for the first time, and so they're enjoying it, and you're like, come on, and then you get a big laugh from the audience. It's like through that Hail Mary pass. Well, that's a thing that happens.
Yeah. That's the pointy ball game, right?
Dad would be so proud right now.
This show brings together an incredible confluence of pop culture and also science culture. And I think we all understand how much it has pushed science culture into pop culture. But do you guys have your specific areas of expertise within science or pop culture, like each of you brings to the table?
I think at this table, there's not a whole lot of science going on.
Dave is as close to science. He's pretty good at that.
I also got really excited when the former Fed chief Ben Bernanke was on the set, and I was like, "That's amazing!" Who's he? No, don't you remember? No. So there are occasionally but then we had the Chancellor of the Exchequer stop by, and then we had to look on Wikipedia to see what that is. And apparently that's the 3rd most powerful guy in Britain, and he's a big fan of the show. So we're really
wow, and I can't even spell Exchequer.
But Steve is our resident Star Wars expert. There are times where we're trying to make a Star Wars reference or a joke, and I will watch him playing the entire movie through his head like it's on a tape. And giving me the answer. He's like, hold on, he's running the dialogue because he's seen it so many times he can recite the entire movie and he'll find it. And Tara is our Harry Potter expert.
So Tara's also actually our resident sorting hat. She's so good at it. She has sorted all the writers into their respective houses.
Hufflepuff.
So you're nice.
And so you decided that Leonard was Hufflepuff.
Isn't he though? He's such a Hufflepuff. Hufflepuffs are great. Who would categorize himself Hufflepuff? Come on, let's see. I thought that'd be more easier, I'm not gonna lie. Yes, nice. Yeah, no, Leonard is so patient, and that's key to Hufflepuff. And so, yeah.
What would Sheldon do?
Guys, Sheldon's a Gryffindor. I know. It seems shocking. Some of you would think Slytherin, right? Wow, but I think because ultimately, the wizard kind of gets to choose their house. And I think Sheldon did his research going into Hogwarts. Really, that hat was on his head for a long time. He really talked it all out. He really was just I think J.K. Rowling calls it a hat stall when the hat's on him. And so I think Sheldon talked himself into Gryffindor.
I think the hat got tired of that conversation.
Ravenclaw, by the way. I
like the weirdos. Like everybody's like, oh, Ravenclaw is so smart, and then it's like, this is where all the oddballs go to like feel safe together.
They're the dreamers. I like it.
I think that's where I would have ended up.
You would. You absolutely would. I
Yeah.
really sorted you. Yes. You would. Slytherin, by the way. Don't be fooled by this charming smile. That is Slytherin through and through.
I love hearing you guys talk about the characters. Do each of you latch to a specific character, or does that change? I mean, obviously you all write for all the characters, but are there characters each of you ends up finding a deep affinity for?
I think at this point, the line's pretty blurry between me and Leonard. I didn't create the show, but I've been there since the beginning, and just weirdly in my own life, I was a very overweight kid until I was 18, and I lost a ton of weight. I went from having less than none girlfriends to overnight dating the hottest girl on the planet and not knowing what to do with her. So, right there you can see why I'm connecting with Leonard pretty well. And we still talk to my former girlfriend, kind of informs Penny a lot. And then even she went on to be a pharmaceutical sales rep. Penny. So.
She actually came to visit one time. Yeah, we all went out with her and got to just sort of pepper her with questions about young Stephen.
Oh.
Sorry. No, just meeting Lisa, Steve's former girlfriend, was like kind of like meeting a celebrity. We'd used her for Penny, stories. So it was like, I was a little nervous.
And you got to enjoy. And how did she describe me sexually?
I say that? Are there kids here?
I realized that she did say two things. Say the first thing.
You got to close your ears for her.
No, can you do it with the accent? 'Cause it was so great. She's like, he was such a virgin when I met him. And then Steve has really soft hands. Like, Steve and Stephen Hawking have those like soft hands superpower. And she said being with him because of his hands was like being in a lesbian relationship.
That's the best story ever.
Imagine all that with a Queen's accent, and it was like you were there.
So this is part of your life that's made it into the show. Do you guys are there stories that you mine from your past that have ended up making it from each of you into the show?
We should talk about the Star Wars tickets.
Oh, okay, so the Star Wars ticket stuff was like a direct lift because it was supposed to go on sale after the trailer played at the Super Bowl, but then it like weirdly went on sale early, like why? And so we were on the set shooting and like we were all on our phones, which we're not supposed to be on, and there was like this panic that went up because Star Wars tickets just went on sale, so like we were kind of like trying to buy tickets in our laps and like all the websites were like crashing out. And we were just like, are you in? How many should I get? 5? And like then the tape would go and like we would have to do a joke.
All the phones would go down for a second, they would roll on a take, and then as soon as the director called cut, all the phones were back up. And we're like, are you in? Are you in? I can't.
And then at one point Sean turned around, he's like, what are you doing? And we're like, buying Star Wars tickets.
So in that episode, in the Star Wars episode, where Sheldon and Amy,
Where they're all trying to do that.
then where Leonard walks out and is just like, the ticket's already on sale. That was us.
There are a couple of guest star stories to share.
James Earl Jones, I don't know if you guys saw the episode.
I specifically stopped them from telling me this story last night.
There's a few pieces to this. The first one is he's just as delightful as he appeared to be on that episode. Charming and sweet and happy to talk about it. So if you remember in that episode, Carrie Fisher was also in it. So when James Earl Jones did his Darth Vader stuff for Star Wars, he did it in a recording studio. And we learned that James Earl Jones and Carrie Fisher had never met in real life until they were on our stage.
And she saw him.
So they're walking towards each other, and Carrie says, "Dad!" awesome part is when you talk to him, Darth Vader's voice comes out of his face, and it's hard. Like, your heart starts pounding. It's crazy. Even if it's just like, nice to meet you, but it's like, oh my God, it's Darth Vader. So there's one moment, and in that episode at the end, where Sheldon and James are in a sauna together. And we do the first take, and his towel starts to slip down. And I think he had shorts on under. But so the wardrobe person comes out to adjust his towel, and the mics are on, and we hear Darth Vader say, "Did you see my dick?"
But I think in our heads it sounded a little different. It was more like,
"Did you see my dick?" We had fun with him. He was the best.
I was also hearing it from Coming to America, right? I use the royal ass wipers.
And Maria, you had fun with your boyfriend Nathan Fillion.
This is
I know,
want
this
to
is
be
my most embarrassing story of my life. But so I got to meet Nathan Fillion at a Golden Globes party, and it was like pretty late in the party, and I was feeling pretty brave. And I went up to him, and I was like, "Hey Nathan Fillion, you know what's a good show? Firefly." And he was like, "Thanks." And I was like, "Someday I'm gonna make $1 million, and I'm gonna buy the rights to that show, and I'm gonna make both of our dreams come true." And then he came on the set to be on our show, and Steve was like, "Maria, do you want to meet Nathan Fillion?" I was like, "No."
Actually, speaking of other little moments that made it into the show, so we had met Nathan a couple of times at Comic-Con. He's the sweetest, he's so great, and he wanted to do the show, and we wanted him to do the show, and it was a love fest. And then I was at a restaurant a couple of months before he ended up doing Big Bang, and I saw him there. And I don't know if you remember when Nathan was on the show, but Leonard and Koothrappali think it's Nathan Fillion, and they walk up to him while he's eating, and he just stares at them like, "Why are you bothering me?" So I was like, "Oh, I'm gonna let Nathan know we want to use him on the show," because I know he told me he wanted to do it. And I walked up, and he was with a lady friend, and he was eating, and I got that look. Probably got, and I was like, "I'm Steve from Big Bang Theory. You said you wanted to be on the show," and then the shields came right down, and he was awesome again. But I still think about it.
So I was wearing, I dressed as Hellboy yesterday, and I had these 2.5-inch lifts on my shoes. And I was talking to Nathan in the green room, and I was wondering, why is talking to Nathan different? It was because I was actually looking at him eye to eye for the first time and knowing him. How far in advance do you guys plot out what's going to happen on the show?
Hilariously, none advance.
But, I mean, you sit down at the beginning of a season and have an idea of where it's going to roughly go.
that's adorable. You're the cutest right now.
There are many shows that do that, and we are not in that. So.
The closest we had, I mean, we knew at the end of last season, you know, that Leonard and Penny were on the way to Vegas to get married, and that Sheldon and Amy had broken up. So that gave us a starting point.
And I think we kind of knew that season 9 was going to be the year that Sheldon and Amy finally had coitus, but we didn't really know when. We just knew somewhere, all right, how long are we going to make this poor girl wait? 5.5 years seems like a good amount of time.
And so we sort of had a landing place at least going in, because I realized that the new Star Wars movie was coming out, and it would be a big thing for our characters to address, but we would shoot that episode before the movie actually came out, so we'd actually have no way of talking about it. So part of me thought, well, this is a great way to get them to show us the movie early. And then that failed entirely. And so then it seemed like, well, that could be an interesting thing if Sheldon has to give up seeing it for Amy. And then I think Steve is like, well, that could be the night that they're going to have coitus.
A couple of things that I knew for years about that episode. I knew there were 3 things. I knew that we wanted to have Bob Newhart come back as the ghost of Professor Proton to give Sheldon fatherly advice. I knew that when it came down to the moment, I thought it was really important that Amy be scared. because for all her talk over the years, I think the reality is, as a woman in her mid-30s being intimate for the first time, the feeling, she would be shaking. And then the last thing was that I thought that it should be on her birthday so he could say, I look forward to next year when we do it again. That's kind of all we had. And then you came up with the idea that Star Wars was coming, and that could be, and then on the birthday thing, like every once in a while, over the years, people would be like, oh, well, what if it's Amy's birthday? It's like, no, we have to save that. It's very important to save her birthday. So then you had come up with the part of that Star Wars was coming, and that the conflict could be, premiere night was Amy's birthday, so he had to make a choice. And then it was Tara who realized that Leonard and Wolowitz and Kung Polly could be as nervous and excited about seeing the new Star Wars movie as much as Sheldon and Amy were nervous and excited.
I love that parallelity. That was thrilling.
I was watching it happen with Steve. Like, we had this advent calendar in the room that was counting down to the movie.
It's a Lego advent calendar.
It's a Lego Star Wars.
Star Wars.
Yeah, and we repurposed it to count down instead of to Christmas, to the Star Wars release. And Steve was in charge of putting the little Legos together, and you could watch him he was nervous, he was excited, it was like his wedding day. He was just like, oh my gosh, like what if it's bad, but it's not gonna be bad, it's not gonna be bad. It couldn't possibly, JJ wouldn't do that to us. Like, he had all the spectrum of emotion, so it was all happening in the room too.
It was like a dream come true. I'd love you, starting with Dave, to just give a brief little biography of how you got this job.
I got glasses and braces in the same week of 5th grade, so I feel like that was a step towards getting this job. That was on my resume. Yeah. When I had been a writer on Third Rock from the Sun for a while, and then had done a bunch of pilots, and when I saw this pilot, it just so resonated with me, and one of the things that resonated with is it just reminded me of hanging out with my friends. And so when I met with Chuck and Bill, I went down the nerd list of like, I have these engineering friends, and I have these things, and I have that, and then I was like, and in a costume during college, I was at a costume party with the Doppler effect. And Bill said, what? And then we explained to Chuck what the Doppler effect was, and then I explained how I had the white lines were closer together and farther apart, and I ran around the room getting drunk going, wow! And then later when we did that first season, our physics advisor, who's a professor at UCLA, was standing next to me, and he was like, man, how do you guys come up with these ideas? And I was like, well, actually in college, I did that. And he just looked at me, and his grad student was there too. What? Like, I was like out-nerded the physics, and I was like, yes!
Awesome.
So I think that's why I got that job.
Yeah.
I just had a really magic interview. Like, I didn't have a ton of credits. I just started writing a couple years ago, and I went in and I told him the story about how for my anniversary I had wanted my husband to get me a Phantom Blade in World of Warcraft, and instead he'd gotten me like an Nalgene in real life. And what a big fight that was, because I wanted an in-game present, and I had gotten him an in-game present that I spent a lot of time putting together on the auction house. And it was just like we talked about that for a while, and then Chuck mentioned that Caprica had just started, and I was like, oh, we should just all go watch Caprica. And then like the interview was over, and I remember when I left, the last thing I said was, I'll see you guys later. And like closed the door. And I was like, oh my god, why did I say that? I'll see you guys later. But it was a good vibe. It was like I've never really understood that you can be a fit for a show before, but like it just worked out.
Yeah, unlike Maria, I had the worst interview for the show ever. I had gone to film school. I, graduated, was looking for a job. I started on the show as an assistant. Worst interview story, I lied on my resume and I got caught in the interview by Bill Brady, because nothing gets past Bill Brady. I worked on the show as an assistant for about 2 years. During that time, pitched some stories, they got on air, and then there just came a point where Steve said, let's do this for real, and it was literally overnight. Overnight, they replaced me I started the room the next day and been there for 3.5 years.
And the lie was that you could speak conversational French.
Oui.
And then, and Bill started to try to speak to her in French, and the blood just left her face.
And the great thing is
Now,
that
she has ways that she tries to defend it, but the bottom line is she couldn't speak French.
she puts a lot of weight on the word conversational.
Why would that be on the resume to begin with?
Because I quit at the time. I thought I could. No, it's because the retelling of the story has been that I said, speaks fluent French, lived there for 8 years, is perfect in French, ask me anything in French and I'll answer it. And like, that wasn't it. I had lived in France. I had a basic understanding. And then when you're in an interview and you get nervous, like I didn't even know how to speak English. I was so nervous.
My mother claims to speak fluent French after 2 glasses of wine.
I started off at Nickelodeon actually when in Florida, so like Nickelodeon in the 90s, all that, Kenan and Kettle. And then moved out here, Drake and Josh. So Steve and I had started working together years and years ago at Nickelodeon, and we're friends, and we just sort of had gone. In fact, I remember we were working on a show when you were staffing that year, and I remember watching.
We were working on the first season of iCarly, and we were in the iCarly's writer's room, and I showed those guys the Big Bang pilot, because I had been offered 2 different shows that year, and I wasn't sure which one to take, and we watched them both. I was like, I don't know, what do you guys think of this show? And it was the Big Bang pilot.
So, and I was working on another show at the time. I was doing a show called Rules of Engagement, and I had done 3 seasons there, and it was a lovely place, and I liked it, but it was always sort of on the bubble. You never knew who was coming back. And Steve called me, my contract was ending there, and he's like, I think you would be a really good fit at Big Bang. So, so he got me. I came in and interviewed with Steve and with Bill and with Chuck, and that's how I got the job.
You write.
So you have specs, so you have writing samples that you submit, and your agents will submit them, sort of all over, but usually it helps if you have an inside connection, if you have someone there who's worked with you before, who, you spend a lot of time in a writer's room with these people, so it's important for when they're hiring you, for them to know that you're not an asshole. So if you have someone in there and you're like, he's funny and not an asshole, which I think my best quality, not an asshole. I think strongest. Some people here might disagree.
Remember, he's still Slytherin, exactly.
Tell me about Richard Feynman's van. Richard Feynman is maybe one of my greatest heroes of the 20th century.
So, Seamus Blackley is one of the guys who developed the Xbox, and I met him years and years ago, and he called me out of the blue about 1.5 years ago, and he said, oh my God, I finally watched The Big Bang Theory. Do you know how great it is? And I was like, yeah, I've been writing on the show, I've been telling you to watch it. He's like, I watched it, it's awesome. He through DVDs, he became obsessed with it, and he came by, and he also has a hobby of reconditioning classic stand-up video games, and he has about 80 of them in his space in Pasadena, which is incredible. So we all went out there, had a party, and then we also saw that in the back is the Feynman van. And so Richard Feynman...
The real thing.
The real thing.
Wow.
And so Seamus is a physicist, and he had... That van, after Feynman's death, had been kind of passed around to other physicists. They didn't want to get rid of it, but it's not like a museum wants to take that place. So everyone saw it. It was really cool. And as you know from the episode, Feynman, he took the van down to Long Beach and had pinstripers like paint, his diagrams on it. And I guess he would also drive that van down to his place in Mexico. And he bought that place in Mexico with money from the Nobel Prize. And so that's one of the things I've been pitching over the last couple of years, was like, guys, after Comic-Con, let's go, you can go to Feynman's place in Mexico. And the guys never got there, and we have never gotten there. So because people became aware, it seemed like a cool thing the guys would like, and that was, like Steve was saying, it's one of those stories that percolates, like you don't know how it's gonna work out. And then at some point the idea of let's take the van to Mexico and let's blow it up. And so
The real van, we did not destroy the real van.
Okay.
A duplicate was made, although Feynman's daughter watched, even though she knew it was a duplicate on fire, I still had a visceral reaction to it.
Sure.
think she said she had learned to drive on that van. So we actually use the actual Feynman van as in the episode, and just the duplicate that's on fire at the end.
That must have been thrilling to have it on the set.